This video is going to be covering Learning Target 1, which says I can define, compare, and classify different types of real numbers. So we're going to look at, well, what is a real number and what does it mean to classify real numbers? Ms. Solomon is going to act as our student so we can make sure that all of your questions are getting answered. Ms. Solomon, are you ready to get started?
I think so. I have a sheet of paper and my calculator. Is that all that I'll need?
That's all that you need. So if you don't have a sheet of paper and calculator like Ms. Solomon, pause now and get those materials. So to get started, let's write down some things on your sheet of paper. The first thing we're going to think about is, can we write every number as a fraction? So how about 0.25? Can we write 0.25 as a fraction? So Ms. Solomon, do you have any ideas?
Well, I just know that 0.25 is 1/4.
Okay. So that one, it's kind of intuitive. We know it. We've seen it a lot. We know that 0.25 is 1/4. So what if I gave you something like 0.825?
I think as a math teacher, that is familiar to me, but I'm not sure that if I didn't do math all the time, I would know what that was.
Okay, so do you have any ideas on how we could maybe figure out what it was? Do you have any tools?
Well, I know years ago we learned that that's 825 thousandths, and I can simplify that. But I think at this point I would just use my calculator.
Awesome. So at one point in time, maybe back in elementary school, we learned how to write decimals as fractions, maybe in 6th grade. And so you might look at this and know that that's going to be 825 over 1,000, but what if you didn't know? So let's take a look at some tricks and how we can use our tools to help us figure out if we can write something as a fraction. So Ms. Solomon told us she remembered 0.825 is the same thing as 825 over 1,000, because she remembered that from learning it and from being a math teacher. But what if you didn't just know it? Because a lot of times you might look at something and say, I'm not sure if I can write it as a fraction. But what we can do is use our calculator to help us. Ms. Solomon, do you remember how to use the calculator?
Yep, I do.
So what do we need to type in first?
0.825.
Okay.
Then I need to press the math button.
And where's that?
It's on the left-hand corner of the TI-84. It's the third key down.
Okay. And then once we press math, what do we have to do?
Press enter, because that's fraction. And then press enter again, and it gives me the fraction in reduced form.
So the calculator tells us that 0.825 is equal to 33 over 40, which you're right, is just the reduced form of our 825 over 1,000. But the calculator helped us see that 0.825 can be written as a fraction, which we might not have seen before. So let's look at something that maybe even myself or Ms. Solomon off the bat might not know. So let's say I wanted to know if the square root of 441 could be written as a fraction. Me looking at that, the square root of 441, I don't know it off the top of my head. Ms. Solomon, do you know it off the top of your head?
No.
Okay, so in the event that we couldn't do it in the top of our head, what do you think your first step would be?
I think I'd go to the calculator.
Okay, so when we type this into the calculator, what does it tell us the square root of 441 is?
21.
21. All right, so I look at that and I see that I got a nice number, but The question wasn't, can I find the square root of 441? The question was, can I write this as a fraction? So is there a way I could write my answer as a fraction?
Yep, 22 over 1.
21 over 1.
21 over 1. Jeez.
But we got it.
Woo.
So we had a square root. We didn't recognize it right away. We put it in the calculator and we found out that we got a nice number. Numbers that we work with a lot. And we know that nice numbers are whole numbers. A way to write them as fractions is to put it over 1. Well, now we need to combine some of the things we've talked about. What if I wanted to know the square root of 26?
I definitely don't just know that.
So what's the calculator tell us the square root of 26 is?
5.099019514.
All right, so looking at that, does that look like something we're going to be able to write the fraction for?
I doubt it, but I can try in the calculator.
So back when we weren't sure if we could write 0.825 as a fraction, before Miss Solomon tells us what she's going to do, I want you to think back, well, how did we figure out if that could be written as a fraction?
So now I'm going to try it. That's in the calculator. I'm just going to hit the math key and then enter because that says fraction and then enter again.
So like she said, it's already in the calculator, so we can just go straight to pressing the math button. And when we press math, enter, enter, does it give us a fraction?
No, it just gives the same answer.
So what's that tell us?
This can't be written as a fraction.
Can't be written as a fraction. So Learning Target 1 is all about this thing called the real number system. And you might think all of our numbers fall into the real number system, but we actually have these numbers on the outside that are called imaginary numbers. And you might have seen them before, you might see them in the future, but they look like this. They have this I part of it. And it's called a complex number or an imaginary number, but we're really not going to get into that right now. We are going to just focus on the real numbers, the numbers we work with the most often. And if you notice, the two big categories in the real number system are rational and irrational. So let's take a look at these words more, rational and irrational. And Miss Solomon, from a student perspective, what would you say these words mean, just in life, not necessarily in math class?
Well, I hear these words a lot when we refer to people, especially irrational people. They're like crazy people. They just talk on and they make no sense. Where rational people, we tend to think of them as more sensible people.
Okay, so irrational, they're crazy, they're going on, they make no sense, where rational is a lot more sensible. And if you can remember these definitions when you think about rational people versus irrational people, I really think it's going to help you understand the difference between rational and irrational numbers.
That was
So in math, we define rational and irrational numbers as a rational number is a whole number or a fraction. So if you think back to maybe middle school or something like that, these are the kind of the answers you always hope to get. You know, you think maybe you made a mistake if you get something that's really ugly, but you know that it worked out if you got a whole number or a fraction that you recognize. Those are our rational numbers, the ones that we like to see, the ones that are easy to work with. Our irrational numbers, like Miss Solomon was saying, they're crazy, they go on and on. They can't be written as a fraction. And the best way to decide, can we write it as a fraction or can we not write it as a fraction, is to let the calculator help you. So let's look back at this picture that we had before of our real number system. And we had rational numbers and we had irrational numbers. Now, Miss Solomon, if you were to start solving a problem, would you rather work with whole numbers or fractions?
definitely whole numbers or zero.
So our whole numbers and our zero actually belong in a category within the rational numbers. So our rational numbers we know include whole numbers and fractions. But like Miss Solomon said, sometimes we prefer to work with just whole numbers. So we gave them its own category called the integers. So our integers are our whole numbers, including negatives, and 0. So if I ask you to classify the number 1/2, Miss Solomon, is that rational or irrational?
That's rational
Rational. Why would you say first that it's rational?
because it can be written as a fraction.
Written as a fraction. Now, is it an integer?
No, because it's not a whole number and it's not 0.
So this would belong on the outside in rational, but not in integers. But what if I gave you the number -5?
That's an integer.
That's an integer. So not only is it a rational number, because I can write it as a fraction, but specifically it's a whole number, so it goes in that smaller category that we call integers. Now what if I asked you to classify something like the square root of 49?
Well, I know the square root of 49 is 7.
So the square root of 49 is actually the same thing as 7, so where would you classify it?
That's an integer.
Integer. Awesome. So sometimes they might try to trick you and give you a square root, because a square root you might not be able to see right away. If you didn't know the square root of 49,
I would just use my calculator.
use your calculator. See if it gives you something nice. We want to remind ourselves that nice, rational people, it's sensible. 7's a sensible answer, so it's going to go under rational. But what if I asked you something like the square root of 50? Is that something you know off the top of your head?
I definitely don't know it, so I would put it in my calculator, and I just did, and it gave me a crazy number that just goes on and on. It's definitely irrational.
Definitely irrational. And if we wanted to double check that it was irrational, what would be the next step in the calculator?
I would try to get it as a fraction by hitting math, enter, enter, and it doesn't give me the answer as a fraction. It just shows that same crazy number going on and on.
So it must be irrational. So to recap, what Learning Target 1's asking you to do is take numbers like 1/2, -5, square root of 49, square root of 50, and classify them. So looking at what we just did, Ms. Solomon, what does the word classify mean?
It really means to just arrange these numbers into categories.
So we took 1/2 and we decided what category should 1/2 go in. It should go in the rational numbers, but not the integers. We took -5 and we decided where should we put it? What category should it go in? We were classifying -5 as an integer. This is what Learning Target 1 is asking you to do. So now what I would like you to do, now that we recapped what Learning Target 1 is I want you to go to my website and download Learning Target 1 Homework 1 into Notability and try those problems.